Joint POW MI Accounting Command, JPAC. I am the director of the SIL, the Central Identification Laboratory. You hear SIL used sometimes as if it's a separate entity. It is simply the scientific laboratory part of JPAC. We take great pride in the name SIL. It's been around since 1947. There was a SIL that operated after World War II. There's another SIL that operated after the Korean War. So it has a rich history within the profession of forensic science. But when you hear SIL, think JPAC. JPAC's mission is not so much on the policy end. That's primarily a DPMO function. Our responsibility is we're on the operator end. We do the recovery and the identification. And so that's what I want to talk about. There is a. Can we get these lights dimmed at all? There's been a lot in the press recently about identification methods and so on. So what I'm going to try and do is talk to you a little bit about how we go about making identifications. I hope I answer your questions. If not, please ask questions later on. Now I'm going to talk about the recovery part, and then I'm going to talk about the formal identification part. And I'm going to talk about them as if they're separate things, but they're not. The identification really begins in the field. Thank you. It's really, you're looking at two ends of a continuum. The identification really begins before we even go out in the field. It begins with the archival research, the historical research. I'm going to pick up the thread of the story when we're actually in the field, and then I'm going to try to walk you through till the end of the formal identification process. We are an accredited laboratory. We're accredited by the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors. That's the largest accreditation body in the world. AFDIL, the Armed Forces DNA Lab, is also accredited by the same body. And we are accredited to crime laboratory standards. Well, obviously we're not a crime laboratory, certainly not a typical crime laboratory. But what that means is our approach to documentation is the same. The way we document a site, the way we control evidence, that's the same as a crime laboratory. The difference is our crime scene, if you will, is sometimes 60 years old, 70 years old. And so we bring a slightly different toolkit with us when we respond to the scene. And that tool is archaeology, because these are really archaeological sites after all this amount of time. So this is a recovery scene in southern Vietnam, what had been South Vietnam. It's an aircraft crash site. These aircraft crashes are enormous from a recovery scene standpoint. They cover acres. So what you see here is the attempt to establish some spatial control. The idea of we want to know where everything that's on that site, we want to be able to trace it back to where on the site it was found, because sometimes the association between two objects is important information. So we want to keep track of where everything is found. So what you see is we've established a grid system. It's typical archaeology. In this case, it's a fairly big grid. Each one of these squares at this site is 5 by 5 meters, so 15 by 15 feet. So you can get some idea of the size of this recovery. And you can also get some idea of the depth. We also control for the third dimension, depth, because we want to know where everything is found. We've gone down in excess of 30 feet on some of these recoveries. So this crime scene, if you will, can be enormous. It can also be, on the other end of the spectrum, it can also be very finite. This is an example of an isolated burial. So instead of an aircraft crash that's scattered over, as I said, acres, in this case, we're looking for an isolated burial. Now, this happens to be a Cold War loss from 1952, an RB-29, which is a converted B-29 bomber. It was converted into a reconnaissance version, and that's what the R stands for, reconnaissance bomber. 29, was lost over Uri Island. Uri Island is one of the islands in the Kuril chain. Somebody mentioned the Kuril Islands this morning. The Kurils are the islands that stretch north of Japan. So if you look at a map, you've got the Japanese islands, and then there's a string of islands that just continue north. Those are the Kurils. Prior to World War II, or prior to the end of World War II, the Kurils were part of the Japanese Empire. Following World War II, they became part of the Soviet Union. So in 1952, when this RB-29 is shot down, the Uri Island is part of the USSR. A body washes ashore on the island, and Soviet guards collect it and they bury it. And they bury it in what had been a Japanese cemetery. So if you look down at the bottom, there's kind of a diamond shape here. That's a Japanese cemetery. Now it's unmarked, and it dates back several hundred years. With the wall coming down, relations improving between the U.S. and Russia, Russia contacted us and said,